Saiki Kusuo is one of my favorite gay characters of all time. A guy who just wants to eat his coffee jelly and live a quiet life, but his psychic powers turn every day into a disaster. He tries to avoid attention, but there's no hiding his strength, even though he already has limiters he wears every day that does so. But if then, how strong is Saiki K really? His powers all depend on those little limiters stuck on his head. To measure Saiki K's strength, we have to focus on two levels. First, his daily life with the limiters on, and second, what happens when the limiters come off or break. Let's break down what Saiki can do at every stage and see where his power truly ends. But before that, if you like this type of content, sub up. The goal is 15k. Thank you. To establish a baseline, we first need to analyze the Saiki we see for 99% of the series. Unlike a usual shonen protagonist who is always going plus ultra and pushing their limits to the absolute maximum effort, Saiki is always suppressing his. Every feat we witness from him is not a display of his maximum effort, but rather the absolute minimum amount required to solve his problems and get back to his coffee jelly fun time. To start off though, let's first evaluate his strength. Saiki once stated that a single punch from him would obliterate everything in a 7-kilometer radius behind its point of impact. To put that into perspective, that kind of blast zone spans an entire city and even beyond if he spams it. In the manga though, he casually dispersed all the clouds in the sky with an energy blast from his attack. There's even a tongue-in-cheek claim that Saiki casually erased a nation, implying he has at least country-level telekinetic destructive capacity. While comedic in tone, these statements align with his demonstrated power. And in one instance, he moved an approaching typhoon off course to prevent it from hitting Japan and disrupting the trip to Okinawa. In the anime though, he was shown dispersing the storm instantly, though the manga does clarify that he actually diverted it elsewhere. Even so, affecting a large cyclone system demonstrates energy output on a regional scale at minimum. And as the series approaches its end, a giant meteor threatens Earth's existence. Saiki ultimately has to stop this planet-ending meteorite before it impacts. And the exact method isn't explicitly shown, and he could have vaporized it, teleported it, rewound time on it, etc. But the result is pretty clear. Even with limiters, Saiki possessed the means to prevent a global extinction event, and this solidifies his base attack scale in the planetary range. Now let's quickly move on to speed. Saiki's speed with limiters is similarly superhuman, frequently reaching or exceeding light speed in reaction and movement. And Saiki can perceive and act on sub-millisecond timescales. In one comedic bit, a coffee jelly snack falls off a table and Saiki manages to catch and eat the jelly in 0.006 seconds or 6 milliseconds before it hits the floor. This requires reaction over 100 times faster than the blink of an eye. He also trained himself to hold back his throws because initially, even a casual pitch would exceed Mach speeds. He's also shown flying across continents in moments. A prime example of this is a specific feat where he flew from Tokyo, Japan to Washington, DC in just a fraction of a second, approximately 7 times the speed of light. There's also a panel citing that he can run faster than light, combining with multiple light speed feats. And while running might be an oversimplification, as Saiki usually teleports or levitates, his reflexes and movements are easily in FTL with limiters still on. And it's worth noting that Saiki often opts to teleport rather than physically move at high speed, especially since using pure speed can accidentally create sonic booms or even worse. However, even his teleportation is constrained in base form. He must wait 3 minutes between teleports of himself as a cooldown. Despite such self-imposed limits, base Saiki's combination of speed and teleportation makes him nearly impossible to catch or outrun for any normal human or even most mid-tier superhumans. Moving on to his psychic abilities, or as power scalers like to call it, hacks. Hacks refers to the broken abilities or techniques that bypass conventional power measures, and Saiki's toolkit is full of them. With limiters on, he still retains a vast array of these as well, albeit some at reduced range or intensity for safety. Here are the key abilities Saiki wields in his base state along with their scope. Saiki's most used powers are most definitely his telepathy and mind control. Even with his limiters on, Saiki's telepathy is always active, constantly hearing every thought within a 200-meter radius. But by combining this with clairvoyance, he can extend his range even further, and again, this is without him taking off the limiters. He can also project thoughts into others, implant songs or ideas, and even use Angel's Whisper to make people feel guilt or comfort at will, as they showcase in a lot of different animes where the angel and devil beside your head discussing, devil eventually wins and the protagonist ends up doing something he regrets, and same flow all the time. But anyway, if he wants, he can force two people to hear each other's thoughts as well, creating instant mutual telepathy. Also, in one instance, he used telepathy to manipulate Rifta Imu's dream while she was asleep to show her a person she likes turned into the person she hates the most. And through physical touch, Saiki's telepathy allows him to transmit vivid images directly into someone's mind. He's even capable of overwhelming targets with rapid-fire thoughts to disorientate or confuse them. However, individuals like Nendou or insects are immune to his telepathy or mind reading, as they're either too simple or fundamentally different for Saiki to interpret. Basically too dumb for them to generate any kind of thought in their brain. His mind control abilities are just as versatile. Saiki can alter memories, perceptions, and behaviors with a thought. He's made people forget events, believe in fabricated realities, and even fail to notice when they're stuck in a time loop, although that feat being without his limiters. But he can also change what people say or do to manipulate situations. But despite the scope of these powers, Saiki actively restrains himself. He avoids wide-scale use to prevent overwhelming his senses and to maintain a normal life. The only real limit to his telepathy and mind control is his own restraint. Saiki's psychokinesis is extremely powerful and versatile. With a thought, he can lift or move objects ranging from small items to entire buildings. He's halted runaway vehicles and even stopped a falling meteor via telekinesis or some other measure, but most likely telekinesis. The upper limit in base isn't clearly shown, but there's a hint for it. Saiki was about to move the sun itself before deciding against it, as the sun was disrupting his sleep. If true, that puts his telekinetic lifting strength on stellar scale. Though presumably he only considered it and didn't follow through, still, moving even a fraction of a star or stopping an asteroid showcases high-level telekinesis. In base, Saiki can teleport himself and use a port to bring objects from anywhere on the Earth. He can also teleport things across different worlds. For example, banishing the hero Hagane no Ken to another world or a parallel reality of sorts. The only restriction is the cooldown, 1 teleport per 3 minutes for teleportation, and as for a port, he has to exchange something of equal value to bring it into his hands. But one of Saiki's most broken powers is the ability to rewind time on objects or people by up to 24 hours. This means he can undo injuries or avert disasters after they happen. However, just like any other ability for Saiki, the catch for this is that base Saiki can only use Time Leap on a given target once per day. He has used this to escape otherwise deadly situations or fix mistakes. However, if an event is beyond a day old or the limit reached, base Saiki will need other solutions to do so. Although at one point, his power randomly activated repeatedly, trapping him in a 6-second time loop that went on for 16,784 times until he learned to break out by emptying his mind and using his powers. This showcases that while time manipulation is potent, it comes with complexity and strain even for him, as a time leap was an unconscious outburst of his powers. Saiki's list of abilities could go on for quite some time if you continue at this rate. But to name a few more, there's his X-ray vision, which is automatic and sees through objects and clothes, invisibility, psychometry, reading the history of objects by touch, pyrokinesis and cryokinesis, astral projection, which is an out-of-body spirit form, levitation or flight, clairvoyance, which is remote viewing of any location, mediumship is seeing and exercising ghosts, shapeshifting, which he can transform into other forms, even a girl, albeit with a lengthy 2-hour process, petrification, which means anyone who meets his gaze turns into stone unless he wears his special glasses. Regeneration, precognition, which is when something bad is about to happen, Saiki's head hurts, which follows up by him learning and seeing the glimpse of a future, usually in dream form. Curse manipulation, and many useless comedic powers like turning beverages to cola, etc. While not all of these are useful in battle, several are game changers if used properly. One of his one-time useless abilities was to create anything out of nothing, which turned out to be a very useful ability after all. But for instance, mind control and petrification could end most fights instantly if Saiki wished. In base, Saiki's durability scales to his output, and he can withstand planetary level forces, as he has tanked blows from an alternate version of himself who had no limiters at the time and survived. As for stamina, Saiki's psychic endurance is effectively superhuman. He repeatedly used his powers for over 16,784 times in a 6-second loop, and before that, he did the same but repeated it for 3,000 times. So add on to that 16,000 and yeah, that's a lot. But he did this without collapsing and states that while his physical body has 0 strain, he is exhausted mentally. His spirit/soul is stated to have infinite stamina since ghosts don't tire, and in normal circumstances, Saiki doesn't tire easily from using his powers as well, unless he's looping time or using something extremely taxing. But overall, with his limiters on, Saiki is comfortably a stellar level FTL speed Esper with an arsenal of psychic or hacks abilities. The limiters ensure he doesn't accidentally destroy the world in daily life, but even this sealed Saiki can handle nation-threatening events and outpace nearly any foe. And things get truly insane when Saiki's limiters come off, whether the one limiter is damaged or removed. At this stage, Saiki's power explodes by orders of magnitude. This series shows that forcibly removing his limiters causes a massive surge. His psychic power multiplies proportionally to the time his power was kept limited, although I still think that it isn't equal to a full theoretical peak no limiter Saiki, but you can only speculate how strong a peak Saiki would be. Anyway, this is why Saiki feared this state. Since he'd worn the devices for years, the boost is enormous. In practical terms, Saiki without limiters is stated to be hundreds of times stronger than his restrained self, though some feats imply an even greater increase. So, let's break down his capabilities in this state. Again, let's start off with his attack potency/strength. Saiki remarked that as a kid of around 9 to 10 years old, he could destroy the moon easily, simply by flying through it. If a pre-teen Saiki without full control feared casually blowing up the moon, then his unrestrained 16-year-old self is clearly operating on tiers of strength above that, as limiters on Saiki was casually about to move the sun during his sleep as well, albeit using telekinesis. One of the most striking statements is that upon removal, Saiki's psychic aura alone could likely cause the destruction of the entire Earth. The Mystic Grandma and their NASA space station satellites all detected the same energy. Essentially, the psychic energy he normally holds in check would radiate outward and wreak havoc globally without even lifting a finger. This is consistent with Saiki's feats as well, and when he took one of his limiters off, Saiki released a shockwave that gouged out a huge portion of the surrounding terrain just from him turning his head. To underscore this, simply walking into someone without his limiters will send them flying out of the atmosphere, and once he starts running, it will be as if a giant mecha is walking down a city, destroying everything along the way. If Saiki had instantly regained 100% of his power, simply turning around during his sleep would have obliterated his house and more. A far cry from the 7-kilometer punch trenches of his restrained form. I mean, he outputs the same or even stronger values of force even just by turning his head. Now, I would like to move on to speed, but to quantify his boost in power more easily, I want to take a look at the actual multiplier that Saiki gets from removing his limiters. To do this, we can first take a statement from the novel that came from Saiki, which states that removing the limiters makes Saiki about 100 times stronger than with them on. But we would have to take this as a baseline boost of his powers, as some feats suggest that this is way off what it should be. With his limiters on, restoration can rewind time by 1 day. Without them, he can rewind time on the same object by 7 years. Since 7 years is approximately 2,555 days, this suggests a power multiplier of at least 2,500 times. A more dramatic calculation comes from his telepathy. Its range increases from a 200-meter radius to Earth's diameter. Dividing the unbound range by the limited range gives a multiplier of approximately 31,855 times. At first glance, one might be tempted to slap on this 32,000 multiplier on all of his feats. However, a deeper look reveals a more complex system at play. The fact that the multipliers for restoration and telepathy are so vastly different suggests that the limiters are not a simple, uniform power dampener. If they were, the percentage of suppression will be consistent across all abilities. The inconsistency points to a far more sophisticated mechanism. The limiters do not just turn down the volume on the psychic output, but instead, it appears they are suppressing each ability by a different degree. It's logical to assume that his passive, always-on abilities like the overwhelming sensory input of telepathy and X-ray vision would require the most suppression to make his daily life bearable. Conversely, his active, consciously used powers like restoration might be suppressed less, allowing for more fine-tuned control when he actually needs to use them. This means we cannot simply apply a single multiplier to calculate his true power. He doesn't have a power level in the traditional sense. So, how would we define his multiplier then? In simple terms, we can't. But what we can say for speed and strength is that the multiplier is most definitely a 100-time booster to his original, which means he would be moving at 700 times the speed of light and a multi-star level attack potency / strength at minimum. In the novel, alternate timeline Saiki, albeit being weaker than the main timeline Saiki's full chop, was stated to have destroyed all the buildings, houses, and mountains from air pressure alone, which might seem impressive, but when his telekinesis comes into play, his AP will easily reach to multi-star level at a low ball, but more on his AP for later on. The real improvement is that any restriction on his powers that affected teleportation are lifted. For example, in base form, he had to wait 3 minutes between teleports. With limiters removed, he no longer has to wait at all. But that being said, constantly spamming teleportation does seem to drain Saiki's stamina a lot, as seen in his battle against Kusuke. But this is not the craziest part. The biggest issue with Saiki was his mind control. Without the limiters, it could span over the whole world, and at one point when he was in year 5, anything that Saiki imagined would come into existence in the real world. And while you would imagine there's some limit to this, there isn't really shown to be one. And considering Saiki never lies when narrating his own ESP or Psi powers, this isn't hyperbole as well. He made it so that colored hair is normal. He made everyone in the world have super regeneration from minor injuries, the ability to think super fast in stressful situations, made it so buildings can be built in weeks instead of years, and for their clothes to never rip off oversensitive areas and to reappear after someone is naked. These are shown to be changing the very rules of his own universe just by simply thinking. To add to this also means he can read or manipulate any mind on the planet at will. His clairvoyance likely scale similarly as well. Nowhere on Earth or even near vicinity in space is hidden from him. Saiki's teleportation range becomes interdimensional even in base. In a novel, it is shown that he can go across parallel universes at will without the limiters, although he needs the alternate Saiki strength to return afterwards. Or it could be even a clone that helps him. What I consider the most terrifying aspect of Saiki without the limiters is his biolocation. He can create a clone/double of himself which have the same powers but a unique personality and looks. To add to this double can also use biolocation, but the catch is, the more you duplicate, the more inhumane that double will get, but they still have the same powers nonetheless. He has shown to make 37 clones of himself in this series, but based on his explanation, I don't think Saiki has a limit on how many clones he can create. But to keep it safe, we can say his max is 37 for now. But there's one more interesting and broken feat that came across in a novel involving sight energy. And yes, before anyone tries to comment, the novels of Saiki K are canon. Sight energy is a unique force from the Saiki K novel that exists outside the normal psychic power system. It's generated by the supreme observers of the world. In other words, the readers and viewers. It is created whenever they feel that something is off within the story, which is capable of altering the plot and merging fictional universes and worlds. The antagonist, Haganeno, uses a year's worth of sight energy to cross over from his own cancelled manga into Saiki K, aiming to merge both the worlds and replace Saiki as a protagonist. His reality warping begins to distort dimensions and rewrite the narrative itself. Saiki counters this directly, teaming with his alternate self, and decides to use their psychic power, Psi, instead of sight energy, replicating the same type of dimensional distortion Haganeno created. This combined effort forms a stable portal, matching sight energy's reality warping effects and expelling Haganeno from their story. This feat shows Saiki's psychic powers is on par with and capable of nullifying a higher dimensional metafictional force designed to rewrite the story itself. And last but not least, we need to remember that Saiki has resistance to power nullifying. This is shown in the series and in the novels. The first time it is shown is when Kusuke permanently removed Saiki's abilities with the new limiters. Saiki's base adaptation allows him to regain all his psychic powers without doing anything. And in the second instance is when in the novel, Saiki is trapped in a dream world by the alternate Saiki, which exists in a realm where Saiki does not have any psychic powers. But Saiki manages to break free from this without any of his psychic powers. But still, Saiki's sight energy feat would undoubtedly be the strongest of all without his limiters. But now, after all of this, let's see how far Saiki scales overall. Even with his powers suppressed, Saiki is still absurd. He has casually diverted a typhoon. From a single punch, he can obliterate everything in a 7-kilometer radius behind its point of impact, and prevented a planet-ending meteor from touching Earth. His combat speed and reaction are comfortably in the FTL range, with teleportation as an instant backup option. Telekinesis at this stage can potentially move celestial bodies like the sun, even if it doesn't actually follow through. And his hacks list is stacked as well. Time reversal, petrification, mind control, clairvoyance, regeneration, and more. The planetary meteor stop alone pushes him into 5B planet-level territory at the absolute bare minimum. But factoring in his stellar range telekinesis and the ability to consider shifting the sun's position and durability that scales those outputs, his consistent baseline is far higher. With limiters, Saiki sits comfortably at 4C or star level. He has a feat, range, and raw AP to interact with stellar scale forces, plus the hacks to bypass almost any opponent who can't resist mental or temporal manipulation. Overall, Saiki without limiters scales to 4C or star level. Removing the hairpins multiplies into hundreds to even tens of thousands depending on the ability. Speed hits 700 times the speed of light, and his hacks expands to global, even universal reach. Not to forget that he can travel between parallel universes and dimensions. His imagination alone once altered the regenerative capabilities, construction speeds, biology, and even generated clothes out of thin air for sensitive areas for the entire planet without limits being in place. But the sight energy feat is what truly places him at the top tier. Saiki matches and nullifies a metafictional, higher dimensional force capable of fusing and altering entire narrative worlds, a feat consistent with affecting fifth dimensional structures. That would be low 1C or complex multiverse level with low 2C if you really lowballed it. But we are not doing that here. So overall, Saiki without limiters would be low 1C or low complex multiversal level. However, at the end of the day, we all know that Nendou, Teruhashi, and the cockroach all scale above Saiki without a doubt.